Over the last decade, we've been plagued by numerous questions about life on the daily.
Call us back when you have the time. Which you just...
Among the most pressing and pertinent are questions about the future. Does America as we know it even have a future? Have we, the elder generations, irrevocably screwed things up for the country as well as the planet?
It's not one thing, it's another. Find that to be true.
Is there any hope for our children and the younger generations? Have things become so bad, so hopeless that there's no longer a reason to go on fighting for a better tomorrow? Is there a magic word or phrase which we could say that could help? Or are our brains so baked from the trauma that we can no longer remember anything at all? Have our lines of communication between each other, our communities, and the generations forever been severed? We live in interesting times, to quote the perennial phrase, an era which doesn't just require more people to step up and take action in obvious progressive ways. It also calls upon artists to reflect the current moment with boldness, with intelligence, and with heart. The best films ever made, the ones which are both topical and timeless, are those that contain all these qualities as well as have a personal touch which makes them feel like they're coming from a unique human being instead of a corporate committee. Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another is one of the best films of this year and this decade, if not beyond. It's a film which speaks brilliantly to our collective current predicament while also blending several evergreen cinematic genres, a mix which keeps the film riveting and even hilarious throughout its breezy 162-minute runtime. It's yet another example of Anderson's mastery of his craft, the filmmaker demonstrating how adept he is at weaving between disparate tones, styles, and themes without ever breaking a sweat. On top of all of this is the fact that the movie is not just a veteran auteur experimenting with the medium. No, One Battle After Another is clearly a very personal movie for Anderson, and this can be seen not just in his choice of time period and overarching themes, but also in the way that some of Anderson's favorite collaborators, as well as some family members, turn up in the movie. Now, for me, and I'm sure many of you, movies can be soothing and even therapeutic to an extent. I love this art form so deeply, and it has brought me a lot of comfort in times where life has had a lot to pile on me, whether that be emotionally or in the form of tangible stresses and setbacks. But movies can only heal so much. You can only escape so much before you should probably go talk to someone. Genuine professional therapy has helped me regain equilibrium and has kept me from spiraling out of control. And that's where this video's sponsor, BetterHelp, comes in. BetterHelp is on a mission to make starting therapy easier. They'll connect you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. You just fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. You can easily switch therapists at any time with no extra cost if the therapist you have is not right for you. And that's really important. You want to make sure that you're getting someone who understands you and is meeting your needs. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. So start practicing some self-love, savor life, and equip yourself with the lessons and tools that only BetterHelp can provide. Just click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/filmspeak and get 10% off your first month of therapy. That's betterhelp.com/filmspeak for 10% off your first month. And thank you so much to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. It's only right that any discussion of One Battle After Another should begin with Thomas Pynchon. That's because Anderson's film is distinctly Pynchon-esque, utilizing traits of the postmodernist author that include satire, drug culture, non sequiturs, absurdism, and so on. Even if One Battle After Another isn't a direct adaptation of Pynchon's 1990 novel Vineland, in a spiritual sense, it certainly is. The ways in which Vineland inspired One Battle After Another are readily apparent, as both the book and the film concern a group of revolutionaries, the People's Republic of Rock and Roll in Vineland, the French 75 in Battle, who find themselves scattered and on the back foot years after their initial glory days. The core of both stories involves a former revolutionary trying to protect his teenage daughter from a marauding government stooge who may be her biological father, given that he had a sexual relationship with the revolutionary-turned-double-agent mother who abandoned her. Despite these broad similarities, so many of the details in One Battle After Another differ greatly from Vineland, especially regarding the messages that each work wants to leave the audience with. One Battle After Another is to Vineland what, for lack of a better example, Anyone But You is to Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, with the book and film sharing a core identity before going their own separate ways. Pynchon is hardly uncharted territory for Anderson as well. His 2014 film Inherent Vice was a much more direct adaptation of Pynchon's eponymous novel. Just as Inherent Vice did, One Battle After Another captures the spirit of the author, proving that Anderson and Pynchon remain a fabulous cinematic match. That's because both artists are consummate satirists, albeit in different ways. Anderson's long but considered filmmaking career, 10 films in 30 years, has seen him make movies of a variety of genres set in almost as many different time periods. To date, only Hard Eight, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and now One Battle After Another have had a contemporary setting. The fact that Battle is his first contemporary set film in 18 years is another indication of how personal the material is to him. While satire is present in all of Anderson's movies, this isn't the same type of satire employed by other auteurs such as Stanley Kubrick or Sergio Leone. Anderson's brand of satire tends to be ironic but loving, and this is because the majority of his characters are people on the fringes of society in some way. Gamblers, porn stars, oil magnates, and so on. All of Anderson's cinematic worlds, even and especially the historical periods, are slightly skewed and heightened versions of themselves. One Battle After Another is no exception. The movie contains a great many connections to our real world and our most pertinent political issues, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one parallel. For example, though the opening act of the movie is ostensibly set sometime in the 90s, maybe even early aughts, a lot of the aesthetic of the French 75 feels 70s and even blaxploitation coded, featuring characters with names like Jungle Pussy and using analog technology to keep themselves off the government's radar. Later, the modern-day army, commanded by Colonel Stephen J. Lockjaw, are called Mankind United, a brazenly ironic name for a goose-stepping group who like to plant white agitators wearing Van Halen t-shirts into protesters in order to justify firing on a peaceful assembly. Then there's most pointed classical satire in the film, the existence of an ultra-secret and powerful Christian nationalist organization called the Christmas Adventurers Club, which Lockjaw is desperate to join. It's Anderson employing satire that recalls Pynchon, Terry Southern, even a bit of Philip K. Dick in its sheer absurdism. There's even some of PTA's idol, Robert Downey Sr. in there. The Sisters of the Brave Beaver is something out of Putney Swope or Batman 73.
What the fuck is going on?
However, it's the absurdity of how difficult it is to commit to a true revolution while dealing with the challenges of everyday life that finds itself squarely in One Battle's crosshairs.
I'll be seeing you very soon.
Not if I see you first.
For people like Pat Calhoun and Deandra, the French 75's revolution is a righteous cause, something they believe in with a kind of moral clarity. For people like Perfidia Beverly Hills and Jungle Pussy, the revolution is kind of an aphrodisiac. The thrill of taking power from and exerting over men, and the man intoxicating them. Unfortunately, this lust for battle is shared by Lockjaw, which is a big reason why he and Perfidia are inexorably drawn to each other despite their ideological differences. Even though the first act of the film ostensibly shows us the glory days of the French 75, all the seeds of their downfall are sown early, and most of them have to do with the characters not properly communicating with each other as well as with themselves. Eventually, these seeds bear fruits with a legitimate revolution of their own. Perfidia and Pat have a child, an event that leads Pat to become a dedicated father rather than a militant revolutionary. Perfidia, meanwhile, suffers from postpartum depression, which only makes her jealous of her baby girl, Charlene, and she decides to continue her campaign on her own. Bob doesn't feel like it's his fight. He's used to supporting instead of leading, and what happens when he's forced to actually take charge and be a participant in the cause he allegedly cares for? Instead of reliving the past via tales of revolutionaries past, like watching the Battle of Algiers over and over again, he needs to be involved. It doesn't necessarily mean fighting the fight the way he used to, but allowing it to evolve, using the fact that he has a daughter and cares for her future to galvanize his actions in a way they failed to for Perfidia. Perfidia's arc, and later the letter she writes to her daughter, examines her regrets in abandoning her child, and also allows for the melancholy of what's happened to seep in. Is she happy? No, not really. Will she change the world like Perfidia tried to? She'll try, and that's all we can really hope for. Equip her with the right tools and allow her to lead the charge. We failed, but maybe you will not. That's what led her to make the mistake of killing a security guard during a bank robbery, and she and her friends get caught during the ensuing car chase because they won't or can't slow down or stop. Perfidia justifies her choice to manipulate Lockjaw's feelings for her and rat out her comrades to save herself through witness protection as a way for her to survive and keep fighting for the revolution. The other thing about Perfidia is the postpartum depression affects her responsibility as a parent, but instead of motherhood galvanizing her fight the way that fatherhood did for Pat, the nature of the child is shameful for her as a revolutionary. It's eating her from the inside until she stands up to Lockjaw in denying him what he wants and his ownership over her. And with Lockjaw, boy, he's a real son of a bitch, but he's also a simpleton. He's pathetic, looking for acceptance and belonging wherever he can get it. He uses authoritarian power to remedy personal mistakes at all costs, especially Charlene or Willa, his biggest literal mistake, and will raid a sanctuary city and incite mass chaos for a personal issue, just so he can become part of a racist club that really doesn't have any interest in having him amongst their ranks. He's also genuinely deluded into thinking Perfidia is somehow his lover and violently retaliates when he's denied her. But this leaves Perfidia on her own instead of with a strong force of compatriots, headed into Mexico all by herself. It also leaves Lockjaw standing in an empty house, rejected, with flowers and a farewell note from the woman he was convinced he was in love with and who loved him as well. Both Perfidia and Lockjaw lose themselves to the aesthetics of their respective causes, prioritizing that rather than the way they're actually fighting for their causes. And from our perspective as an audience, I mean, it's pretty fucking clear that Lockjaw just really fetishizes Perfidia more than anything resembling actual love or compassion. He values her strength, only seeing her as a warrior because it plays into the power fantasy he's bought into. With Perfidia, there is a power reversal she enjoys, getting off in the heat of the revolution, which is something, I might add, that Pat denies her despite her love for him. It ultimately leaves Pat being hastily told a plan to get himself and Charlene into hiding by adopting the identities of a mother and son who've recently died in the sanctuary city of Bacton Cross, Bob and Willa Ferguson. Howard Somerville treats this as a rebirth, telling Pat, "Welcome to the world, Bob." Bob, meanwhile, looks like a ghost because effectively he is. And speaking of ghosts, the film's intermittent voiceover narration drifts in and out of scenes provided by various characters at different points. Pat's voice tells us early on that from here on out, it's one battle after another. These bits of hypnotic narration feel similar to the narrated thoughts we hear in David Lynch's Dune or Roman Polanski's Macbeth, where these may be statements said out loud or pondered internally. When we cut to 16 years into the future with a grown teenage Willa, Perfidia's voice tells us that it's 16 years later and the world had barely changed. The French 75 had a revolution, all right, but only within themselves. The film unpacks the absurd psychology of America, particularly modern America, culminating in one big car chase. But the whole movie plays like a feature-length chase, as PTA examines a country fighting to propel itself forward, to survive, only to continually stall out over time. At its core, this is an urgent story of overcoming generational miscommunication, listening, learning, and evolving, rejecting selfish stagnation, and the necessity of upholding a revolutionary spirit in an age of dwindling freedoms. A damning critique of the contradictory nature of a cultural melting pot obsessed with purity in various forms, but also of miscommunication across generations and communities. That's our greatest weakness, and it's where the enemy is best. All of the Christmas adventurers are on the same page, speak the same code, are direct in what they want and how they're gonna get it. Their unification is something the resistance, the revolutionaries, lack and is the cause of infighting despite having a unified cause. I love how PTA depicts that during the middle section with Lockjaw and Willa. There's also a purity to both causes that PTA brilliantly mocks. The right wing might be more organized, but they're also not too bright, manufacturing wars and causes to justify their hate. The left has the right cause, but is so unorganized. The right being incredibly evil, the left being an intellectual superiority and pretentiousness that's detached from the real way people are forced to fight every day. This is best explored, obviously, in the incredible phone call sequence, where the resistance, an organization that is so unorganized and rejects the typical hierarchy of power, has a customer service line that makes it difficult for Leonardo DiCaprio, who is proven himself to be in this organization, who has a past, to get the necessary information he needs to help his daughter. It's perfect. It is just two people having two separate conversations and one not hearing the other and the other being mad at the one for not. It is the perfect examination of the infighting that plagues revolutions. The rest of the film from this point follows the remaining characters and a few new ones as they deal with the fallout and determine whether or not the revolution is or is not completely lost. This is examined via how selfishly everyone does or doesn't act. Lockjaw, for instance, is convinced that he's destined to become a Christmas adventurer and is riding so high on this false sense of superiority that he's blindly and maliciously determined to eradicate all traces of his past with Perfidia, including their daughter, Charlene. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Sensei Sergio St. Carlos, who is a paragon of the community in Backton Cross, including being one of the leaders of the local undocumented population. Sensei Sergio is a rock amidst the rolling storm of conflict that Lockjaw stirs up in Backton Cross, and it's he who not only rescues Bob from trouble twice, but keeps the man in check when Bob's personal battles with Lockjaw, with finding Willa, with the remaining members of the French 75, stand to get too selfish. After all, there are the issues present of deportation and social injustice visited on marginalized people, and it feels like PTA is commenting on the need for white people specifically to make everything about them by centering the film's main conflict around Bob and Lockjaw. The collateral damage is the real story, and yet we continuously ignore it. We get selfish. As I mentioned earlier, Bob and Willa are still ghosts, only Willa is one unknowingly, believing that her father is little more than a paranoid substance abuser. Bob has dedicated his life to protecting and encouraging his daughter to the severe detriment of his own well-being, and is allowing himself to become mired in regrets that Willa has never had a strong maternal influence. He's put himself into such a purple haze that he can no longer remember the myriad passcodes and phrases the French 75 insist on, leading to him endlessly arguing with the organization's phone operator, which only prevents progress from being made. Even Willa is shown to be a little selfish in her own way, though she's clearly a woman of character and strength, her keeping a smartphone in defiance of Bob's mandate, even keeping it secret from Deandra when she comes to rescue her, only jeopardizes her safety and those around her. After all, as the Sisters of the Brave Beaver remind her, she's the daughter of a rat, and as we come to learn, her biological father is the most selfish man alive. However, while all the chaos is happening, which is brilliantly orchestrated and choreographed by PTA, not to mention supported by Johnny Greenwood's wonderfully propulsive, anxious score, Anderson slowly reveals ways in which there may indeed be hope for the future, as well as for Bob and Willa. Sure, the French 75 are further harmed and dismantled thanks to more selfish actions leading to poor Deandra's arrest. Did she give up Bob's information? Probably not, but it's ambiguous. Despite that, Sensei's immigrants are saved. Sure, Lockjaw gets hold of Willa and hands her over to the bounty hunter Avanti, who in turn hands her over to a racist militia called the 1776. Despite that, Avanti cannot, in good conscience, let a teenage girl be murdered, so he takes out the 1776 members at the expense of his own life. Despite Lockjaw miraculously surviving the assassination attempt by Tim Smith on behalf of the Christmas adventurers deeming him impure for acceptance, he gets his comeuppance at the hands of the people he so worshipped, dying not a flashy death by fiery car crash, but an indignant and humiliatingly quiet one in which he's happy to have a desk job and, finds himself getting gassed in the process, rejected by the very people he destroyed his life to be accepted by. Despite Bob being continually anxious, confused, and forgetful, he listens to those trying to help him rather than selfishly ignoring them. I love how, for Bob, the revolution starts out as something to be observed. It's as theatrical as the movies he watches. He was always in the back, supporting in the French 75, never on the front lines, and so when he's forced into the front lines, he's like Snoopy pretending to be the Red Baron, and it makes for some of the best comedy I've seen in ages. He has big main character energy, especially when interacting with Sensei in his Underground Railroad. The persecution, the threats of deportation, this is all regular stuff for them. It's tragically commonplace, and so they're less bothered because they have plans in place. They understand how to get from point A to point B while keeping their community intact. There's an efficiency to Sensei and his community's actions that the revolutionaries lack, and could probably incorporate more of that into their cause. Everyone thinks they're Che, everyone is fragmented. Because of this main character syndrome that plagues Bob, he sees himself as the center of the renewed hunt for the French 75 when he was really a foot soldier for the movement. He's an afterthought, even in Lockjaw's crusade, where Willa is his objective. Hell, Bob even gets caught in the middle of the story, and the authorities don't even realize who they've captured, enabling his escape minutes later. And Perfidia comes from a long lineage of revolutionaries and has been conditioned to fight one way, no matter what. She believes in a purity of her own, not along racial lines, but in her behavior as a revolutionary. Feels like it's wrong to feel any way different, to fight the fight any way differently than how she's already been fighting it. And that's the thing. The revolution never ends. It evolves. And for Perfidia, she fails to see that it can evolve and still be as effective, if not more so. Bob may be derisive and abrasive towards Willa's friends, but he also wants to make sure he's respecting their pronouns. He may be running behind the kids who attempt to take him safely across the rooftops of Bacton Cross, but he tries to keep up. He may miss his shot at Lockjaw with Sergio's rifle, but he finds another way to stay in pursuit of his daughter. He may be sad that he can't properly do his daughter's hair, but not for himself. It's more for her. What's great about Leo's performance is how he plays Bob as having sort of passivity to his actions. Not necessarily in terms of him not caring or being involved, but in recognizing his whiteness and privilege and letting the voices of marginalized people lead the charge. That ultimately translates to his problem with parenting and how he lets his daughter speak her mind and do all these things instead of being able to converse with her. The dilemma about black hairstyling was a big tipping point for him, not only because Willa's mom isn't there to teach her girl things, but there's a cultural detachment he can't fill, and so he feels ill-equipped and kinda hopeless. During the film's final chase, Bob learns to give himself over to Sensei Sergio's teachings. The desert roads almost literally become ocean waves, and Bob has
No fear. I got them. Just like you. Uncle Cruz.
Which is, as a bonus, a beautifully cheeky nod by PTA toward the star of his own Magnolia. The final chase sequence, the entire third act really, is where PTA really allows the film to emerge as a stealth Western, bringing in influences of John Ford, particularly The Searchers, which is apt for a missing daughter story, and Sergio Leone, particularly The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, in the way the finale feels less like an action sequence and more like a settling of accounts. The key moment in the chase, of course, is the way it stops being a chase, all due to Willa's character and instincts. Unlike her mother, who once described herself as a runner, Willa is not a runner, and she's not going to get caught or killed because she keeps the chase going for too long. Instead, she stops the car and gets out, allowing herself to get into a firing position while Smith plows headfirst into her stopped vehicle. The ending of the film continues this small hope too, as we see Bob is beginning to adapt to modern times and his daughter's wishes by letting her go out and have her own smartphone, all while Willa is motivated to join and protest 3 hours away. It's why it's so tender when she finally embraces him in the end after reading the letter. She gets his struggle in raising her and the baggage that he's carried around being a fighter, but not really sure how to fight without Perfidia. Bob isn't just lying on his couch and lighting up a bong while watching the Battle of Algiers. He's now an instrumental part of causing real change to happen, if not a revolution. The film ends with a group of needle drop cues along with Greenwood's score, God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, a song for the Christmas adventurers. The revolution will not be televised, a song for the French 75, who use the lyrics as one of their passphrases, and a song to represent Willa, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, American Girl. That song is also a reference to one of PTA's heroes, Jonathan Demme, as Demme used it in a scene from his film Silence of the Lambs. The spin on the needle drop is that in Demme's film, the tune is used as an ironic counterpoint, whereas in PTA's movie, it serves as an earnest declaration of affection and hope. Willa is everything we could hope for in an American girl. Willa is the personification of personal, political, parental, child revolt in various forms. She herself is a child in revolt, and her existence came about because of defiance, if not outright betrayal, along political lines. One Battle After Another is a movie about a nation built on revolution that cannot reconcile its progressive past with the present moment of burgeoning fascism. What happens when you stop revolting? Can you afford to do so? Some people, some demographics, are forced to live it every day to be prepared for what happens, usually marginalized people. For people like Bob, an aging revolutionary who's afforded the privilege of being white and never having to experience the day-to-day intolerance of existing in this country, he's able to lose touch with the life and beliefs he used to have. He's stagnated, become complacent, not only because of what happened with his wife, but because of how removed he is from the pulse of the country. By refusing to engage with the modern world, become a recluse, succumbing to paranoia, his wokeness, if you will, has turned in on itself and become more reminiscent of a don't tread on me-esque libertarian. How does complacency actually pave the way for regression? The whole film is about how essential it is to stay woke in the most literal form, to remain vigilant, alert, aware. But that's freedom. As Bob says, when you have it, you don't appreciate it. When it's gone, you miss it. One Battle After Another approaches the evolution of revolution in a timeless way. For the same reason that the time period Moonlight takes place over is vague and open to interpretation, PTA issues overtly specific technological and fashion items and gives the film a broad appeal as a political thriller such that it could belong in the 70s or 90s or today, and that extends to its sensibilities. It's not always as explosive and violent as it first started off. It's not like PTA channeling Michael Mann's Heat, and that's what Perfidia struggles to reconcile with that ultimately leads to her undoing. You can read the prologue as an analog for the American Revolution, or the Civil War, or the Civil Rights movements, and the civil unrest of the 60s and 70s, and how we've dulled that spirit since, allowing for bad actors to swoop in and take advantage. There's a desperate need for interconnectivity in fighting oppression. You can't sit idly by. You need to take small steps. That doesn't mean you need to go out and do what Perfidia did. I think that's just one example of revolution, and we see how it's all consuming and dangerous. There are other, equally as effective ways. Revolt evolves, and so too must the people fighting it. Selfishness is what perpetuates America's problems. All our heroes are lovers of arts. The French 75 use music lyrics as components of their infrastructure. Bob loves to watch movies. Sensei Sergio has a rare Japanese poster of 1978 Superman hanging in his dojo. Willa loves martial arts and dance and so on. The heart of the film, then, is how Anderson shows us that perhaps the way forward for us as a country and a human race is through the togetherness that art can bring. Nowhere is this theme more apparent than in the trust device the French 75 use, which is made up of individual scanners that begin to play part of a melody whenever they're in proximity to each other. That means that the main melody only plays when the correct and trustworthy people are together, implying that it takes all of us working together to get the music to truly play. Roger Ebert famously called movies empathy machines, and Anderson must agree, as he's shown over his entire career his dedication to the preservation of the arts and craft of cinema. Naturally, One Battle After Another famously continues the revival of the VistaVision format, which it not only was shot in, but is also being projected in select cities. PTA's love for the medium is being transferred and communicated to hundreds of thousands of people around the country who are continuing to spread the good word about the film and its craft. In this way, maybe what One Battle After Another is telling us is that the battles may never end, but our potential for shared affection, for common ground, for open and honest communication and understanding, and for our love of art may be the very thing that saves us. Until that time, PTA will just keep making one masterpiece after another.